Dungeons & Dragons Online is set in the world of Eberron. The world of Eberron is different from the other universes. Magic is built into every aspect of the world. Magic is used like technology to provide comfort and convenience. Magic is the tool that's used to build cities and sail ships. Magic is used to invent new wonders, conveniences, from a magic refrigerator to a magic dishwasher, magic photographs, and magic trains and ships and cars. One of the first things new players to DDO will likely ask is, where are all the dragons? DDO has, for Dungeons & Dragons, a lack of dragons. Well, this turns out to be very specific to Eberron lore, something that I didn't know in the beginning. Unlike the other universes, in Eberron, dragons are a very reclusive and ancient race of beings. Dragons live almost exclusively on the continent of Arganesson. Arganesson is off limits to every other race. The dragons who live on Arganesson are only concerned with how the draconic prophecy interacts with the world. Not all of the dragons live on Arganesson. There are rogues. There are random dragons that leave. But for the most part, dragons are only concerned with what they are up to. They really don't have the time for any of the lesser races. They certainly don't care about your party, and if you wandered to Arganesson, there's a really good chance that you would just be killed immediately. In DDO, you really only get to interact with the dragons of Arganesson under very specific circumstances. The dragons of Arganesson get involved when they perceive a threat to the entire universe. They perceive that threat through the draconic prophecy. They will send out expeditions from Arganesson to learn more about whether the problem that they see is real or whether it's just going to go away. And so in Zendrick, and they have sent people, members of their order, to check it out and to deal with it, which is something that they hardly ever do. Players in DDO can, through a expansion called the Menace of the Underdark, travel to the Forgotten Realms, a completely different universe, and dragons there are much different. For a new character in DDO, an interesting thing to go over is that Eberron has 7 days of the week. They are named Sul, Mul, Zal, Weir, Zor, Far, and Sar. They coincide with all of our days. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Sul, Mul, and Zal. They also have 12 months. And the months of the year are Zarantir, Olarul, Threndor, Iri, Dravago, Nim, Larvion, Barakas, Ran, Siphoros, Arth, and Volt. And these months are all tied to the moons of Eberron. We'll talk more about those moons in a separate video. There used to be 13 moons of Eberron, but one of them was destroyed, so now there's 12. Something else that new players to DDO may be interested in as they're making a character is that the present year is 998 YK, and that is the 998th year since the Kingdom of Galifar was founded. Now, why is this important? Well, because 998 YK is 4 years after the end of the last war, and that's a capital L last war. This last war was the sort of equivalent of a world war, and it ended with a cataclysm, a sort of doomsday that destroyed an entire nation. The war involved all of the continent of Corvair, which is the main continent in Eberron, far away from Zendrick, where DDO is. And so the last war involved all of Corvair. It involved all of the nations of the world. The only races that sat it out were the dragons of Arganesson and giants. Their ancient civilization was wiped out thousands of years ago. So any giants that exist now are just sort of tattered rogue bands of barbarians. They really don't have cities anymore. And so the last war was fought for over 100 years, and it was very bloody. We will do a video about the last war. It ended with an event called the Morning, and the Morning was the detonation of this doomsday weapon that wiped out the entire nation of Syria. The country of Syria was a great nation of artists, musicians, poets, and sculptors. The entire country was destroyed. They are all dead. The only people from Syria that exist now were people who were out of the nation fighting or off trading or refugees. What was left in the place of the nation is an apocalyptic wasteland called the Mournlands. It is an entire nation that is ruined, shattered waste that has mutated monsters, magically corrupted mists that poison anyone who enters the land. Magic doesn't function properly there. Healing doesn't function properly there. And any life that goes in there begins to die. The only beings that can live in the Mournlands are the Warforged. And as a result, there is a city in the Mournlands that is run by the Lord of Blades, who does make a few appearances in DDO. We'll talk more about him later. But anyway, so back to the last war. No one knows what it was that was used that caused the apocalypse. But the people who were standing around afterwards in the aftermath, all the nations signed a treaty because they didn't want it to happen again. So there's a ceasefire, but most believe that the war will break out again sooner, if not later. And so any character in DDO, very easily, someone who fought in this war. Zendrik is pretty far from Corvair. A lot of the inhabitants of Zendrik are war refugees or people who fled Corvair for whatever reason, whether they were just seeking a better life or maybe they were pirates. There's a very good chance that your character, unless you make one that's from the Forgotten Realms, because DDO does have Forgotten Realms characters, but if you make an Eberron character, very likely that you are from Corvair and that you had some experience in the last war. Because Eberron is influenced by noir storytelling, new characters are often encouraged when you play the pen and paper game to consider two traits: regret and debt. This doesn't exist in DDO, but it's an interesting concept if you are making a character that you wanted to give sort of a more fuller backstory to add more flavor to. Regrets are things like a tragic mistake that your character made, somebody that was hurt by you or who hurt you, was a betrayal, some misstep that haunts you, something perhaps from the last war, something to do with your family. It's encouraged because Eberron is an adventure that is high fantasy, but it also has this sort of Maltese Falcon noir aspect to it. And so as a result of that, you are encouraged to come up with a character that is jaded, and debts are sort of, the last war lasted 100 years. Many family fortunes were wiped out, and the result is there is a lot of debt in the world. So perhaps your character owes somebody money. Maybe it's a local criminal organization who helped your family get away from the war, or perhaps you worked for active criminals during the war. Maybe they robbed some war supplies and now you've escaped to Zendrik. Or maybe it was something that happened during the ending of the war and now for some reason you cannot pay it back. These sorts of things bring Eberron characters flavor, and you'll see it in the writing that exists in DDO when you go to Sharn. There's a lot of this sort of backroom, backstabbing, noir storytelling. Dungeons & Dragons Online is set on the continent of Zendrik, a wild, untamed land full of ancient ruins, and it is a dense, unexplored continent. There's a reason for this. There's only a few settlements on Zendrik, and they exist on the coastlines. Most of them are pirates who kill anyone who get too close. The ancient giants who once lived on Zendrik were very skilled beings with magic. The giants were the most skilled magical beings that Eberron has ever seen. They learned magic from the dragons, and they took it way beyond what the dragons knew, creating extremely powerful artifacts And as a result, treasure lays buried in the ruins of Zendrik because the giant civilization lived on Zendrik before it was destroyed. So likely that is what drew everyone who is on Zendrik, whether escaping the last war as a refugee or seeking adventure. There is this ever-present lure of powerful magical artifacts that exist in Zendrik, unlike any other place in the world. Another interesting point of Zendrik is that the ring of Siberi's dragon shards that exists in outer space, we'll talk more about that in another video, but there is a ring of dragon shards in space, sort of like Saturn, around Eberron, and they are made out of these Siberi's dragon shards, and every once in a while they fall down, and it just so happens that Zendrik is along the area where these dragon shards fall the most. Not only does it have ruins, but you also have a very high concentration of dragon shards on this continent. Zendrik is full of fortune and glory. Indiana Jones would have a field day here. Not a surprise, because Keith Baker, the author of the Eberron campaign setting, said it's Lord of the Rings meets Indiana Jones meets the Maltese Falcon. DDO is set on Zendrik, this continent that is a mystery. There's nobody who lives there. Like I said, there are small settlements. One of the other things to keep in mind is that Zendrik is cursed. It was cursed as a result of the destruction of the giants by the dragons, also as a result of their war with the Quarry. There are many curses. One of the curses that exists over Zendrik is called the Madness of Crowds. There is a quest line in DDO that deals specifically with this, so we'll go in depth. But if you succumb to this curse, you just start murdering anyone who's near you. There is also another curse called the Traveler's Curse. Maps don't work. You can't align yourself with the stars. If you walk for an hour, it feels like you walked for a day. If you walk for a day, it feels like you walked for an hour. If you find a place where there's treasure and mark it on a map, the map doesn't work. You may never find that spot again. The way that they get around this Traveler's Curse in DDO is teleporters, quick travel. So that's in DDO. There isn't a real area that you can ride around in from one place to the other. Let's say, for example, if you wanted to go from Stormreach to Stormcleave Outpost, you wouldn't get on a horse and ride. You go to a teleportation specialist and they will teleport you directly there. That is from the lore perspective, so you don't get affected by this Traveler's Curse. The city of Stormreach, where characters are headed when they create their character, they are intercepted by an angry white dragon and wind up in Korthos, but there are magical artifacts in Stormreach that counter the curses. And so that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed Eberron with me, and I will catch you next time.